Russia's running out of patience. Across the world's largest country, an internal revolt is spreading in direct response to Putin's war. Citizens are now sabotaging the very trains that move Putin's war machine, and the damage is staggering. 70% of Russia's military transport still happens by rail. So when dozens of locomotives go up in flames, the shockwaves reach the front line itself. But this is not just about trains. It's about a nation quietly turning on its own army, and a government so afraid of its people that it's doubling security spending just to survive. On November 6th, 2025, the Freedom of Russia resistance movement released a dramatic video. The footage showed burning locomotives, explosions, and wrecked railway hubs. According to the group's statement, it had delivered a powerful blow to the logistics of Putin's army. The message ended with a direct threat aimed at the Kremlin. Putin's scum will live in fear and forget what security means. This wasn't an isolated event. A week earlier, in late October, coordinated attacks hit multiple railway stations, halting weapons and ammunition trains bound for Ukraine. Similar strikes had already taken place in September and early October. Each one targeted the same weakness: the railways that feed Russia's war. These acts of sabotage are more than symbolic. Roughly 70% of Russia's military logistics depend on trains. Each destroyed locomotive or disabled track doesn't just delay supplies, it can halt movement across entire sectors. The effect is visible in the chaos among Russian troops. Ukrainian sources and several observers report widespread equipment shortages and delayed reinforcements. The Russian army, already stretched thin, has been forced to cannibalize its own logistics to keep the war going. Inside Russia, the situation is deteriorating fast. Desertions are rising. Intercepted communications by Ukraine's intelligence show Russian soldiers refusing suicide missions, entire squads simply cutting off radio contact. Commanders now classify such cases as 500S, military code for deserters or those who refuse to fight. In one audio recording, a frustrated officer can be heard saying, "20 people are sitting there, 500S I guess, they're hiding from command. Okay, declare them deserters." For Moscow, the loss of control is terrifying, and that fear shows in the numbers. In 2021, before the invasion began, Russia's domestic security budget stood near 2 trillion rubles per year. 3 years later, it has doubled to 4 trillion. Yet even with that enormous figure, the Kremlin still struggles to contain the growing unrest. This revolt began not with politics, but with exhaustion. As casualty lists grow longer and war fatigue spreads, Russians are starting to see the true cost of Putin's ambitions. The Kremlin's narrative of victory no longer matches the reality soldiers bring back, or don't. To stem the desertions, commanders have been given extraordinary orders: handcuff soldiers to the wounded, physically preventing them from retreating. Multiple videos have surfaced online showing conscripts, many limping or on crutches, pleading for help. In one such clip, a man with shrapnel wounds holds up his slippers and says, "People against their will are being handcuffed, sprayed with pepper spray. I didn't pass the medical commission. What for? They throw us out there like meat. We don't want to die. Please help." He identifies his unit as number 24,776, a desperate attempt to prove his testimony is real. The cruelty of these policies reflects a deeper problem inside the Russian system. Soldiers are rewarded for territory gained, not lives preserved. Saving lives brings no promotion. Capturing ground does. And that logic drives reckless assaults where men are treated as expendable. Propaganda on Kremlin television tries to justify it. In one recent broadcast, a presenter explained what he called the moral fortitude of the Russian army. For a European army, defeat begins when 30% of its forces are lost. For the Russian army, it is 70%. Only then do thoughts appear like, maybe we're losing. That's the whole difference. That kind of messaging shows how far the regime is willing to go, preparing citizens psychologically for heavier casualties ahead. The propaganda machine may be running at full capacity, but cracks are widening. Russians are beginning to question why their sons and brothers are being sent to die while the families of the elite stay safe. In 2023, American journalist Jason J. Smart exposed a glaring hypocrisy. Vladimir Solovyov, one of Russia's loudest war propagandists, had 2 sons living comfortably abroad. His 21-year-old was working as a model in London, even as Solovyov called for escalation against Ukraine. When the revelation spread across Russian social media, public outrage forced Solovyov to respond live on television. He insisted that his children had returned to Moscow, but avoided mentioning that neither had joined the war effort. Stories like this have fueled resentment. Ordinary Russians now speak openly about the cost of the war. One woman's voice note, shared widely on local networks, captured the despair. First my cousin was mobilized, then my brother went. Both are now in coffins. My cousin went missing in action. My brother said, "I will find him." He did, in Bakhmut. After a year at home, injured, he went back. None of his old unit was alive. He went missing again. Later, DNA identified him from part of the spinal cord. That's all that was left. The grief is spreading faster than censorship can stop it. And as morale collapses, some Russian soldiers are surrendering voluntarily to Ukrainian forces. Many say they simply want to see their families again. One captured 21-year-old explained, "Without thinking twice, I surrendered. I don't want to die. I promised my mother I would return." Another said that even sick recruits, those with hepatitis or HIV, were being sent to the front. They call it the Umbrella Squad, he added, referring to the informal label used by other soldiers. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones have turned the battlefield into a death trap. According to a pro-Russia war correspondent, the chance of reaching the front alive for new recruits is roughly 50-50. Once they arrive, their average life expectancy is 12 days. That figure, even if partly anecdotal, speaks volumes about the human cost on Russia's side. While internal resistance grows, Ukraine is exploiting the same vulnerabilities. Just days after the locomotive sabotage, Ukrainian forces launched precision strikes on Russian transport trains mid-journey, targeting fuel depots and supply lines. One video released online shows a sequence of explosions: an oil depot, then 2 trains, then another storage site engulfed in flames. The tactic is deliberate. By hitting rail lines during movement, Ukraine forces Russia to rebuild under fire. A similar attack in August took 2 months to repair. On the very first day the line reopened, Ukraine hit it again. Engineers can't keep up. Media reports suggest Russia's state railway, the country's largest employer, is struggling financially and considering layoffs. That makes each repair slower and more expensive. Analysts suggest that repair crews are also diverted to fix damaged oil refineries, another frequent Ukrainian target, leaving rail infrastructure neglected. The result is a logistical nightmare. Delayed trains mean delayed ammunition, delayed fuel, and ultimately delayed assaults. And in a war where timing often decides victory, that's devastating. But Ukraine's success is not just military, it's psychological. Each strike reinforces the perception that Russia's vast territory, once a strength, has become a liability. Every kilometer of track is another potential choke point. For Western allies watching this unfold, analysts note several implications. Russia's internal instability raises the risk of unpredictable escalation, including cyber operations or energy blackmail. Yet it also reveals how deeply the Kremlin depends on coercion to maintain control, both abroad and at home. So what comes next? Putin's greatest fear may no longer be NATO, but his own people. When ordinary Russians start burning trains and soldiers begin refusing orders, the threat isn't external, it's domestic. The Kremlin is responding the only way it knows: repression. Spending on internal security has doubled, propaganda is intensifying, and commanders are ordered to use force even on their own men. But fear is not a long-term strategy. Some analysts warn that as the war drags into its 4th year, Russia's human and economic costs could become unsustainable. The more Moscow mobilizes, the more resistance it breeds. Each funeral, each destroyed locomotive, each intercepted phone call chips away at the myth of a unified Russia behind the war. For Ukraine, every new act of sabotage behind enemy lines creates breathing space on the battlefield. For the rest of the world, it's a reminder that authoritarian control, however strong it looks, can fracture from within. And as internal resistance spreads, one question hangs over Moscow: How long can a regime built on fear survive once its people stop being afraid?